Hi, welcome. Week number 7. I'm Quan Tracy Cherry, representing Ourrawmaterial here with.
Tavish, Carduff.
And the question for values and ideals that you can leave on our website at www.ourrawmaterial, Instagram, Ourrawmaterial, and a YouTube channel, Ourrawmaterial. In an ideal world, what do you value most?
That's a big ideal world.
Yeah.
I have to think on that one.
Okay, I'm with you on that.
We'll be right back. Hi, Tavish and Quan back to talk about values and ideals. So when we think about value in our raw material framework,
Okay.
what is it?
Well, it's how you determine what matters or what you're going to focus your energy on.
I find it funny how when we think about what our values are, and then we actually look at our lives, how different
Yes.
what we see as what we value isn't where we spend our time and energy. And so value really takes up that space of where are we spending our time. And I mean,
Sort of like putting your money where your mouth is, kind of a thing.
for me right now, my value is eating. That's such incredible food lately. And that's been a focus. So many good things about it.
And then the people that came with that food too.
Of course.
So it was not just the food that was so delicious. It was the preparation and the camaraderie and the slowing down, kind of leaving a little bit of your own time and space to integrate and to welcome with others. So yeah, the experiences, to value the experience of the food and everything that came around with it. Oh, and it's a mental week, like food.
So lining up that food
Yes.
with the values and ideals, especially for right now as we're headed into talking about it and thinking about it, is really kind of a cool space to be, because we see the fundamentals.
Yes.
We see that when these basic needs are met really, really nicely and really well and with a lot of care and intention, every step after that feels so graceful
Yes.
and feels like it's supported and it's important. When we do line up our mental state, which is one of the hardest,
For sure.
it's easy to see where our mentors have brought in the pieces that they've done. And then our spiritual connection really reaches out to us. But the structure around our nurturing and what we value and then how we get the things that we want, that structure supported manifests everything that we want and need. That structure unsupported is something that we are constantly trying to cover up, and we're trying to present ourselves in not deficient in any of those areas. And the reality is we're in a human body, so of course we are deficient in some form of nurturing, in some form of being aware of our values and our ideals, and for sure in terms of aligning with our intentions, because we definitely don't walk around getting all the things that we want all the time.
And then that's why I like your analogy about ideals being the mind's playground. That the more that we look at these shoulds or these oughts or however we get into that state, and then not compare with our values, but recognize the intersectionality or the bridge between the two. So how do you see ideals as well?
Definitely playing around with it a lot. It's given me perspective. And I think that's the best use of ideal, is to really see, oh, I can imagine this thing that is essentially perfect. And we're going to go back and forth about what perfect is. But really, if we make it a little bit more about what we can imagine for our future, and not only our future, but what we can imagine for a collective future. What we can imagine that brings us all together in ways that support each of our ability to have and do the things that we want, so that something like the law of attraction not only works for the mental state of each person doing it, but works at a different level that engages the soul and supports the collective. So I would almost call the ideal space a little bit of a soul, throwing some soul energy into our dreams. Really sprinkling something that is beautiful and sweet and wonderful and would only be seen at the end of a movie. But trying to see that as some sort of reality, at least where we each get to have that feeling in our lives. And I don't know, that looks different from every person.
Well,
so
and
playground.
Playground is what you, and I think that ideals are freely shared. If you can freely share your ideals, then it seems as if that they would have soul energy sprinkled onto them in that way. Ideals can be imposed by our mentors, by religion, by partners, and that we'll get to that next week when we get into conflict. That because you may be with someone who idealizes certain things in a relationship that you do not. And so that's where the mental state comes in, so we can communicate where those values, where we're putting our time, our energy, our drive, and where we feel maybe we ought to put it somewhere. Because
that difference right there is really important.
Yep.
Because whenever we're deciding what someone else ought to be doing, we are placing a value for someone else on something that we actually have no idea whether it should be their value or not. We would just like for it to be based on what we see in our limited perspective of their existence. Other than the Mentors Week, where I really, really would like you to write out a mentors list, because the magic of writing it does so much to change some stuff inside of you and the way that you feel. But values and ideals, same thing. In your head, you can kind of tick off a list of, those are my values, and these are the ideal things that I would like. But when you actually start to write them down and see where you put your time and energy, where compared to where you would like for it to be, and that's just on the value side. That's not even getting to ideals. You start to see, okay, my values aren't where I thought they were. They are actually kind of off from what I would like. And then naturally you start to line them up a little bit. The choices that you make line up more to the things that you want, simply because you've identified the things that you want. I mean, it's just that easy. Just sit down and make a list on one afternoon, 10 minutes, and you'll come across it later and it'll be like, it strikes all these chords and reminds you of all these things you've thought about since you wrote it. So I would urge everybody to actually do that written list. And then the ideals, it's so fun to just write down the best you can imagine for all of the things that you care about. Like, it's so cool to imagine everyone that struggles with addiction healed and telling their story from a vantage point of, that's what I used to do, not what I do now. There's just so much space to really open up heart energies and let go of all these constructs that keep us hard and fast to certain beliefs, and put energy out in the world that we might not believe in, but that is good, positive energy going in the direction of the things that we want.
And practicing it, like, if you value kindness, or if you value goodwill, right, then you can watch yourself during the day. Do you say kind things? Do you think kind things? And in an ideal world, you would all the time, right? Or at least that could be one of your ideals. But how does it come through in practice? When I do values list, there's some intangible values such as goodwill and acceptance, and really getting into how I practice it versus how I may idealize it. Because a lot of times we can treat strangers with a kind of grace that we don't treat the people closest to us with that same grace.
Oh, I think that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yep.
There are a lot of people who take things out on strangers because that doesn't reflect back on them often, unless they run into that later. it's very challenging to walk around unaware of what our values and ideals are, because I love it. We always get a siren when we're saying we call it a truth bomb.
Yep.
So when we walk around without knowing what our values are, then we hold other people to expectations that are incredibly unfair, and we set boundaries that really don't serve us. So all the way around, we're setting ourselves up to be uncomfortable and to be disappointed. So we have to look at the way we present ourselves and the things that we want in the world, where we do spend our time and where we spend our thoughts, what types of things we think about. And in terms of value, looking at what we have, not what we don't have.
Or what we don't want.
And we get into that a little bit more during Resources Week, but knowing what's important to us is some of the first steps in just recognizing how to get along with ourselves and another. You know, if the first 6 weeks of this practice we're building kind of the self, you know, from how we have been shaped to how we pay attention. Now we're looking at how do we interact, you know, what's important to us when we do interact, and then how do we see ourselves fit into the whole of everything. So we're really taking those first steps into what are the things we are going to take into the world with us that we're going to stand for, that we're going to say, I'm for this. Beyond, absent that, we run into someone we think is cool, and so we start thinking like them until we don't think they're cool anymore. And now we've dropped that whole thing.
That's week 8.
We've got built up emotion and pent up issues, and before you know it, we've got a whole set of triggers that keep us from understanding and knowing what's really important to us. We just know what's hurt us, and we know that we don't want to be hurt. So we're operating with a value of not getting hurt, thereby not sharing ourselves, maybe even within ourselves.
Concealing what we're feeling to ourselves, not being fully honest about what makes us feel good in a physical body or what doesn't make us feel good, and then raising it up to a level where we can speak on it. And in an ideal world, we would feel heard. You know, that we would always, when we speak, we would get this, oh God, I was listened to and I was heard, right? But this week 7 is also about, if we're looking at how we get to wholeness, then it is about accepting and allowing and even engaging those parts of ourselves that maybe we don't know how to easily share, you know, but it's necessary in order to move the connections into a more deeper rooted detangling space as well.
Following values and ideals, it comes conflict. And it's when we've established what is important to us that we will fight for it, and that we might come up against someone else whose value might be something contrary to ours, and we're going to have to work something out. We're going to have to know real clearly what's important to us and how important to us it is, so that we are either prepared to fight or we're prepared to work around it and leave that person to their own value lesson.
And that's why, again, the practice is about also breathing. So it is about being able to pause, monitor how things fall in the physical body, you know, and then that way you can get a little bit of a better barometer about, well, I maybe want to fight more for this, or I may decide that I need time to see what happens over a day or two or whatever, that you don't allow the ego to get you into battles that that are more about maybe past things that you haven't looked at than where you are in the present moment, you know?
I'm glad you mentioned breath, because that's one area. I mean, do we put intentional breathing on our values list very often?
No.
I mean, it's new. It's a new addition to mine. And I haven't seen it on a lot of other ones. But that's something that when we start intending to value breath and we start to move that around in our body, so many things change. And if you're doing your values list every week, that means you've got 4 of them in a year, and you go back and look and see what you've kept up with and what you haven't, what might have fallen off and why it fell off. You just find yourself in so much joy celebrating the things that you've opened up for yourself just by intentional breathing. So if I could offer out a new value to anybody to kind of throw on the list and just see if you can work with it a little bit, it's intentional breathing.
And you can connect the intentional breathing to things you do daily, like intentionally breathing as you load the dishwasher, as you feed your animal, or as
Driving
your
your car.
Sometimes these concepts sound lofty, but they really aren't.
They are designed to slip right into your day naturally. Just slip right in as part of what you do every day anyway. Sit down to dinner with your family. Just talk about what they value. Talk about their concept of what an ideal situation for anything looks like. That is doing this practice. That is the act of participating. So, you could get your 3-year-old engaged in this practice and start building the value to understand their own just pillars of thought. I mean, how cool would it be to see a bunch of preschoolers walking around valuing their own emotion?
Well, I know I've heard the word intentions more in the last 6 months than I have in years. So I do know it's in our collective to talk about intentions. And so valuing the motivations, your intentions behind your actions, it's holy. It's wholeness. It's holy. Well, and then the larger picture of your ideals. Ideally, I would like to write every day, right? But somehow that's not always. I don't always make that a value. But what's important is that I'm more aware of it than I have been since I started doing ORM, Ourrawmaterial, than I was 2 years ago. And not in a way that I feel deficient if I don't.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's play out a scenario where, and I think you said you would value writing every day.
Or it would be an ideal.
Ideal to write every day. So you value writing.
Yes.
And you value it. It's pretty high up on the list. So of all the things that you do every day, it's going to be
right up there.
It's going to be up there with them. And you can kind of see where that falls. And as your day comes along and things start to fill up, and you look at it, you see, okay, are these things more important for my day today? Or is writing more important today? And in the day's values, you can go through and make that choice. And then the next day when you didn't write, you know that you made choices for really cool things. So there's no going back and feeling shame or guilt for what you hadn't do. There's just pick up where you left off. Because the other choice would have been to devalue something really important.
Yep.
We never look that way. We always look at what we didn't do as something our future selves regret. Because ideally, we would have done it all, right?
Yeah.
We would have managed to make every single thing that we want happen at all times. Our calendar perfect, our home perfect, our appearance perfect, our parenting perfect, everything that we do, except that that's not even a state. That is something you can value.
Yes.
It's an ideal that we each hold in our own very strange and bizarre way. And the things that we each decide don't fit into the ideal are so personal and so varied that it would be funny to listen to somebody else list theirs off and realize, oh, well, they got all these things to worry about that I never even thought about. But your list is just as long with the things that bother you. So just finding some comedy in this space and letting go of the shame and letting go of the guilt and the shoulds and the ought tos and the just deciding what everybody else's value should lie and where their thoughts should go and where their time and attention should be placed. Those are the things that we work to collectively expand and support and look at what a person is actually good at and support them doing that. Not support them doing the thing that we would like them to know and do.
That old chestnut.
There's an ideal world, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my favorite spots on the ideal playground. But as we work with this, I mean, it really is, it's fun to get in there and mess around with your own ideas of what things could look like and how cool it really could be. And yes, that's also a space where you could look at how terrible things can be. Because wherever we put our thoughts are where the energy's going. So think about that as we place our value. I value putting energy out there that goes against all the fear. I value putting energy out there that takes fear and just kind of makes it dissipate. It feels good.
In an ideal world, you would recognize the fear before you put energy toward it. You would see it, you would confront it. Because again, we're building up to week 8. We're looking at how do we call it baggage or do we call it our experiences that have made us who we are, so we can get to that acceptance and that self-compassion of wholeness in week 12. That's always available. Always, always, always. No matter which week we're in. So,
love wholeness.
Wholeness.
So if you can, spend a few minutes writing a list. Think about what you value. Think about where you actually spend your time. And just look at the difference between the two. You'll find it fascinating.
And remember the question, in an ideal world, what matters most to you? You can leave that in our comment section. Ourrawmaterial website, www.ourrawmaterial.com, Instagram, and YouTube channel, all Our Raw Material. Thank you for joining us.
See you next week for conflict.